So I have today a little scene of some clouds with a couple birds. So what's really important about this picture is really looking at kind of the composition or kind of the placement of all the items. So it's kind of hard to see on the camera since my photo is so big. But you know, if you divide the paper into kind of 4 sections, you can kind of see how the most interesting and kind of the focal point of this picture is kind of this light area, and the birds kind of help to balance out this dark that's over here. So it's really important when you're doing, you know, a drawing or a painting that your interesting objects aren't right in the very middle. So even this little focal point, which is really, really bright, is kind of off to the side. You know, it's not in the exact middle. And that just makes your picture a little more interesting and makes the eye kind of go around it. So I've gone ahead and have, you know, a little bit of a hint of my clouds lightly drawn out in pencil. So this is on sand paper that's for pastel. So it's a little rough and really grabs the pastel really well. Obviously you can also do it on your tone gray paper. Just thought this would be fun to do for this project. And then I just lightly drew it on with pencil, but you could also use your charcoal pencil if you're doing it on your gray paper. And then when you're trying to draw clouds, what's really important to think about is, you know, sometimes when we're trying to draw clouds, we draw like big lumps, but you really want to try and look for the little subtle small bumps in there, and that really makes your clouds look realistic. So like on these, you know, they have little tiny bumps every so often, and that really makes them interesting rather than having, you know, some that are, you know, really, really big lumps. Obviously that's what we think about when we think of a cartoon cloud. But if you have bumps, you know, like little ones and then big ones, you know, it makes it seem a little more natural. And if you look at a real cloud, that's how they look. So with this project, it's kind of a practice and value where you can do exactly the colors that are in this picture and just have it be black and white, or you can also kind of make it a fun practice where instead of doing black for the darkest dark, you pick a different color for dark. So because with color, it's also about the value. So if I looked at, let me clean off my little yellow. So if I looked at these 2 yellows, they're 2 different kinds of yellow, just because one might have, you know, more of a warm tone, one might have more of a cool tone. So, and also what's really important is to think about the value. So if I was trying to do a lemon and I wanted to have some highlights in there, I probably wouldn't want to use the warmer yellow for that, for the highlights, just because this one's so much brighter. So when you're thinking about colors, you also have to kind of think about the value. So sometimes even if our colors are off a little bit, as long as the value's right, it'll still kind of translate and make it seem real. So for this picture, I could do like a really, really dark purple for these darks, or, you know, and then I could have a medium purple, a light purple. So that part is kind of up to you. I'm going to go ahead and start with some of my grays, just kind of demonstrate that, and then we can always add more colors as we go along. So kind of my darkest dark is going to be my black. So when you're using this, since these are kind of big areas, it's good to use the side of the pastel, and you don't want to use very much, because especially with something like this where there's a lot of big spaces, if I start using, you know, a lot of pastel too early, then my paper is just going to get really, really messy. So I'm just kind of blocking it in with those little shapes. And then if you have a gray, this is when you can move into your gray, or if not, you might just have to work with your white and black. But I do have a little gray, and this is kind of a medium gray. And I'm just putting a little bit of my medium gray on top of my black a little bit. I'm always looking at my picture. And then that medium gray is also, whoops, back here. This little pocket. You can also kind of outline, you know, that space and then fill it in. That sometimes helps to get a nice clean edge sometimes. And then for that last little layer, you could use white or a really, really, really light gray. This is the same gray. Or I could even mix it up and do a really light blue for my highlight. So when I'm putting in my pastel, I'm kind of rotating it. And that helps to kind of mix the pastel as well as give it kind of that cloudy texture. And then with this first cloud, I would want to try and kind of start in the middle, you know, since this is kind of already blended, like right here. I'm just kind of rotating my finger. And this paper is going to have a little bit more texture than the gray paper, so it might look a little different. And then since this got really, really dark, I could take my gray again and just kind of run it over that area. And sometimes you can just put a color on top of another and leave it with pastel, because that's how you kind of retain some texture, because it's really easy with pastel to get everything really, really smooth, and sometimes we don't want it that smooth. Okay, so I'm going to take some of my white, which compared to this paper, it looks almost, you know, a little bluish, just because my paper is kind of a cream. You know, in these first few stages, your clouds are going to have a lot of definition. And it might be kind of messy. That's totally fine, because clouds start off as messy. So I'm going to come in with some gray over here. And you know, if you go on top of your birds, that's okay, because we can always find them later. And I'm just putting a little bit of gray behind this cloud, just so that this little highlight will show up really well. Oh, goodbye bird. That's fine. So, and then I could also go over it with some of this, have some variety. And then you can also come in with your white pencil. That kind of helps. So after you get everything really, really blurry, you want to try and come in with like your white pencil and kind of refine some of those edges, because you can kind of see there's almost like a little outline of white, or like a little halo for that cloud. Even up here. So now I would just kind of keep working on that, and I can also use my pencil to add a little bit of highlights to my clouds by doing kind of some side-to-side motions to kind of add some texture. Because sometimes it's boring just to have a perfectly flat cloud. I can kind of round out that area. And then I would keep working on my clouds, and then the last little bit I would work on is my little birds. So those, since they're so small, you probably want to do your birds using like a black charcoal pencil or a pastel pencil. So I would want to make sure I had all of that area kind of filled in. And if you lose your bird, I would very, very lightly try and kind of draw it out, because you can always go over it if you mess up on it. And you know, you can kind of think back to, you know, it's just kind of two lines that are kind of angled, and then a little blob of a body, because these are just kind of the silhouettes of birds. You don't see their faces or any details like that. And then I could put like a little bit of gray around these birds. Oops. And I have a couple little birds. So you could also do some faraway birds. You know, if it feels like maybe you had a lot of empty space or you feel like it needed something. So that's how you can start on your pastel picture of some clouds. So remember, you also don't have to do kind of the black and white. You could also come in and do, you know, fun reds or yellows. You could make like sunset clouds, you know, just as long as you're paying attention to the values. So I wouldn't want to have like tons and tons of light colors everywhere because that doesn't make sense. But see, this pink is so light compared to that red. It's a great color for a highlight.